A background as a choir singer, I believe, in your childhood.
Yeah, I kind of started off singing in a choir, and then started singing solo with a choir, both in the church and kind of outside the church, not literally outside the church.
Looking back, do you think this grounding helped you at all in your later years?
I think it's helped. I think I was trained as a singer, so I think what it's helped is to hang on to my voice. You know, you get a lot of rock singers or whatever, blues singers, whatever, and they tend to sort of strain the voice because they sing from just from their throat, you know. But I was kind of taught to sing in the old-fashioned way, and I think it's helped me in that way. Yeah.
You began to develop an interest in jazz at a young age. How did that evolve?
Well, my father and my brother were both interested in jazz. My father was interested in kind of the old stuff, you know, the old like Louis Armstrong, and his real favorite was Fats Waller. And my brother was a bebop guy, and I was 8 years younger than my brother, so I was kind of hearing all of this and hearing their fights, because they would have sometimes physical fights, because my father thought that the saxophone was the death knell of jazz, you know. So they would always come to blows at times about this, you know. And so I was hearing all of this great music and seeing how seriously they took it, you know. So I thought it must be something.
What was it about the bass that first attracted your attention?
Well, quite simply, it was the only instrument that was free in the school. You know, nobody else wanted to play it, and I sort of, it was there. I started playing it. Then my father took me to a concert, and it was the MJQ, Modern Jazz Quartet, and I just fell in love with the bass playing, you know, of what's his name? His name I can't remember. How embarrassing. The bass player with the MJQ.
Yeah, it slipped my mind too, actually, to mention it.
Yeah, I'll remember it in a minute. I'm a bit off-put by this bleep. Have you got that bleep?
No, I've had it mentioned to me before in interviews. I can't hear it at all.
You can, as long as you can hear it, that's all right. I'm getting this.
Yeah, I believe it is quite annoying.
It's quite annoying, yeah. But never mind. So yeah, so that was very inspirational. And then he also took me to see there was those great concerts called Jazz at the Phil, and the bass player there, I can definitely remember his name, was Ray Brown, and he was very inspirational to wanting to play the bass. So I wanted to play the bass, and there wasn't a teacher in school, so they brought this wonderful old guy. He must have been in his 70s. Then, you know, this is in the 50s, and so he was really like an old school guy, you know, and very, very good player. And he simply said, "Well, you're too small. You have to go away and grow a bit and come back." So in the meantime, I took up the cello, and that became really my first love. It still is. And then when I could, I went back to the bass because I didn't want to play in a symphony orchestra or something.
Do you recall when you first started playing professionally what your ambitions were? Were you terribly ambitious?
Well, in a musical way I was. I wanted to be really, wanted to make it musically as a jazz bass player. You know, my influences in those days when I was like in my late teens were Charles Mingus and Charlie Hayden, Scott LaFaro to a certain extent. So that was really my ambition. My ambition was to be a really shit-hot jazz bass player and play at Ronnie Scott's in London.
What are your memories of your time spent with Alexis Corner and later on with Graham Bond? What kind of impact or input were you able to have musically in those bands?
Well, with Alexis, that was really that was the first real band that I loved that I had played with. I'd played with trad bands and kind of pickup bands and kind of cocktail jazz bands, for want of a better word. I mean, I was a professional from 17, so I would do almost anything. I just wanted to play to make a living at playing. So I played in a lot of very strange things, from Scottish country dance bands to oh, you name it, I played it, you know. And this was the first band with people who were doing music that they loved, as opposed to music that they were earning a living at. And it was a great, opened my mind, because before that I was really a purist, and I only liked very far out modern jazz, like Ornette Coleman or something. And this opened my mind to the blues, first of all. And I loved playing I learned to start to play simpler and more real, I guess. And then with Graham, that was the time by then I kind of switched to bass guitar, and that was really like my university, because we played more than 300, sometimes 320 odd dates a year, and that lasted for about 3 years. So it was a lot of work, and that really was where I learned to play on stage.
You recall during that time starting to harbour ambitions to have your own band?
Not to have my own band. At the time, I really wanted to write. That was, by then, it was always my desire to be a composer. And I wrote a lot of stuff very early on. I wrote a string quartet when I was 11, and I wrote a lot of pieces right about that age. And so it was my ambition was to be recognized as a writer, really. I didn't really want to be a band leader, was not really my ambition at all. To write very early on, and I had a lot of stuff performed, jazz pieces and so on, and that was always my ambition.
You recall
the band leading thing sort of came much later, and by kind of out of necessity, really. If you want to perform your own music, you have to sort of really have your own band.
Yeah.
So it was never my desire to be a band leader. It still isn't. It's kind of like most people, you do it because you got to. There's a lot more pressure if you're the front guy and everything. And that's why I like the Ringo things. I quite enjoy doing that, because most of the time I'm just a bass player in the band, and that's kind of nice again.
Recall your first meeting with Ginger Baker?
Yeah, the first time I met him was at Cambridge University, when I was playing in a trad band called Jim McHugh's Scottsville Jazz Band, and we had a break, and I was just wandering around. I think it was St. John's College, I think it was, and I was just wandering around checking it out, and I heard this amazing, powerful music coming from this cellar. And I kind of went down there, and there was Ginger, Dick Hextall-Smith, a bass player called Morris, can't remember his second name, and a piano player called Johnny Birch. And I really loved this music. It was, it was right up my street. It was kind of hard-blowing modern jazz. And I went up and said, "Can I sit in?" And the usual thing, they said, "No, we're doing arrangements," or something. They probably thought I was, maybe I thought I was a student, I don't know. But I refused to take no for an answer, and I came back later carrying my own bass. So pushing my way through and said, "Here I am." So Dick was the band leader of that band, and they kind of called up some furiously fast tempo, which I had no problem with. And then he said, "Play a ballad." I can't remember which one it was, but some very difficult jazz ballad. He said, "You play the melody," and which I did. And then I just left. And Dick spent some weeks trying to find me, because he wanted me to join Alexis. I mean, he tracked me down eventually, and that was why I got the job with Alexis.
Now, I believe, I may be wrong here, but I believe it was Ginger who suggested you leave the Graham Bond organisation.
Yeah, it was. We had sort of fallen out musically, I guess. I was going in. I was trying to do kind of new things with the bass guitar, and Ginger felt that the bass should really be a supportive instrument and not as. From his point of view, he said I was playing too busy. Mm-hmm. So he kind of fired me from the band, although he was only the drummer in the band, and I resented that. So I just kept turning up. He just kept coming and playing anyway, and then he eventually pulled a knife on me, and so I thought I'd better leave, really.
Did you consciously take your jazz background and experience into the sound of Cream, or was that more of a natural progression?
Well, I don't think there was any big plans about things like that. You are what you are, and you take whatever you've got into wherever you are. Obviously, you change in different situations, but you are still yourself. So I don't think there was a conscious policy of playing this way or that way. There was not that kind of thought put into it, you know.
With three such strong musical forces within the band, how did the decision-making process work in terms of recording?
It was very easy. We recorded what we had, basically. We turned up. We did a couple of kind of demo sessions, and we tried things out. There's one that there's parts of on this last release. We didn't do a lot of demo sessions, but we'd turn up, and I'd say I've got these songs, and I'd play them. Show them, whatever songs, if it's Sunshine or White Room or whatever, I Feel Free, I would just sort of show them. Like I Feel Free, for instance, which was written as a single. It was written really as an attempt at writing a single by me. And that was actually written down as an arrangement on paper, as an actual arrangement with all the parts written out. So that would be then a matter of showing them what I wanted. And things like solos, obviously, Eric would come up with, and to a certain extent, Ginger would come up with drum patterns. But again, that was different for every song. Something like Sunshine, the drum pattern evolved over the time we were trying to get that together. And then we'd go in the studio, and we'd lay down a basic track live with a kind of rough vocal, and then we'd overdub vocals and solos and anything else. Very basic and simple way of working.
How about on stage between the three of you, being three very individual type of musicians? Was there a sense of competitiveness at sometimes?
Well, there's kind of two bands. The band was really two different bands. In the studio, it was one band, and really it was kind of, to a certain extent, it was my direction because most of the material was mine. Obviously, whoever had the material, to a certain extent, was the producer, and obviously Felix Pappalardi, after the first record, Felix was around. So there was two different bands. The one in the studio was one band, and that was depending on whose song it was. But more often than not, because if it was Ginger's stuff, I mean, I arranged most of his songs with Felix. Same applied to some of Eric's things. That was one thing. But on stage, it was definitely a different kind of band. And yeah, quite competitive.
Was there any record company pressure on you to provide hit singles? Because I'm sure you didn't set out to be a singles band when you formed.
Well, actually, yes. I think that's not true. I think I know that I wanted us to be a singles band, and I think, if anything, Cream will be remembered as a singles band. I think anything worthwhile that we did were those songs that I've mentioned. I Feel Free, White Room, Sunshine, Strange Brew, maybe. Some of those songs are good singles. They're good records, as Tommy Dowd would say. A record is a record. An album isn't a record, that's something else. So I don't think we set out to be an album band or anything like that. That was just something that happened because of the kind of audience that was around in the late 60s. That's what people wanted. But I wanted to write very short, memorable songs.
The main impetus in the split of the band, was the writing on the wall there for a while?
In the what?
In the splitting of Cream, was the writing on the wall there for a while, or was it a sudden decision?
I think the band did really what it could do. I think every band gets to a point, and you've sort of said what you can say. I can't think of too many bands that don't. There isn't a point where they've had their say, and they should split. I mean, obviously a lot of them haven't, because they stayed together for financial reasons, but we never started out for those reasons, and when the time came, we all sort of knew it, and it was just really a matter of us all bringing it out into the open and talking about it, and it was, as a matter of fact, Eric who first broached the subject, and I said, great, yeah, I think you're right, and Ginger was not very keen. He wanted the band to carry on, but it was a 2-1 vote. So yeah, the writing was sort of became more and more apparent that we didn't want to sort of carry on playing the way that we were live, and I think we all wanted to. I know that I wanted to move on to other sort of areas of music and use more instruments, really. So yeah.
How vivid are your memories of the Albert Hall farewell?
Quite vivid. I mean, it's a long time ago. I mean, as vivid as you would expect for something that's whatever it is, 30 years ago, whatever it is. So yeah, pretty vivid. I remember it was quite an emotional night, and I think we all kind of looked at each other at the end and thought, are we doing the right thing? Because it was, part of the problem with the band was that we were always touring in the States, and we never, once we had made it, we hardly ever played in Europe, really. Certainly not in England, We hardly played in England, and that was the first time we had played a place like that in our hometown, as it were. And I know that we all looked at each other, but by then it had gone too far, and we couldn't stop it, even if we had really wanted to. But certainly it was very emotional.
Have we ever been really, at any stage, close to a Cream reunion as such? I know you played together at the Hall of Fame a few years back.
Well, there's been, over the years, there's been, sort of one of the members of the band has kind of suggested it or something like that. And there's always been one member of the band that hasn't wanted to do it, and I think that sort of applies now, if I was to say to Eric, he might want to do it, but then Ginger wouldn't, or the other way around, or whatever. It depends what's going on in people's lives at the time. And I'm not saying that it won't happen. It nearly happened after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing, because it was nice to play together, and Eric suggested doing a record, but it just didn't happen for whatever reason. I don't even really remember why. And so it hasn't happened. I think it's a difficult one because, like I say, the band did sort of say what it had to say, but that's not to say that the three of us don't play well together, because I don't think there's anybody around who comes close, without sort of bragging or anything. I think there's a chemistry when the three of us play together that doesn't really exist anywhere else. I mean, the Stones were never really about playing as such. And that would be the only band that I think had that chemistry and also were still alive, So I wouldn't say that it might happen as a one-off thing for a charity or something like that. And maybe there might even be a record someday, which would be nice. It would be nice to actually do a record of new songs just to see if we could come up with some things that were valid, without just sort of trading on the name or something.
So in an ideal world, if there was a reunion, that's probably how you'd like to see it conducted? With a new record, with new material and...
Oh, yeah, I mean, it would be the only way to do it. I mean, unless it's a sort of, for instance, there's a charity around here that's kind of close to me, and I'm vaguely toying with the idea of approaching the guys and asking them to do a one-off gig. Although it's a small place, if we kept it fairly low-key, we might be able to get away with it. That sort of thing might happen. But certainly if it was a serious attempt, it would have to be a record,
Just tonight, our interview guest has been the legendary Jack Bruce from Cream. So you still maintain a regular contact with the other guys?
Not really, no. I mean, we see each other, or talk to each other from time to time, but we were never, apart from the very beginning of the band, we were never really close. We weren't like the Beatles, who kind of grew up together, at least some of them. We didn't have similar backgrounds. We really had quite different backgrounds, and we came together to make music, really, and because we liked each other's playing. And when we had done that, we were very close at the very beginning, but it was kind of like a love affair. Once that sort of had worn off, and it becomes sort of routine, as it were, we didn't have enough in common, outside of the band. So we never stayed close, no. But we do, I see Eric more than Ginger, I think, because Ginger lives in Colorado. I saw Ginger last year. He sat in with me, and from time to time I saw Eric at a kind of lunch, the kind of things that as you get older, you go to one of those lunches to raise money for something.
Yeah.
And, so yeah, I run into them, but it's not, I can't say that we're big bosom pals, no.
Over the years since, have you encountered problems with media and, I guess, the music public in general, in generally comparing your post-Cream work to your work with Cream?
No, not at all. Never had that problem, no. I think because the stuff that I've done mostly since Cream is not really anything like that. I've always tried to do different things, and each record that I've made, each band that I've had has been quite different. I have had trios from time to time, but that's usually been because I've found a guitar player that I really want to play in that way with, like Blues Saraceno some years ago, or Gary Moore sort of now when I play with him. It's more that than this is a kind of Cream rip-off. I like the trio format. For me as bass player, it leaves a lot of room. But most of the bands that I've had have been, have been bigger bands, 4 or 5 piece bands, or bigger.
What would you probably put down as your happiest period since Cream?
With Cream?
Oh, since Cream.
Since Cream?
Yeah. What lineup has probably satisfied you the most?
You mean the best band or whatever? The one I liked most?
And gave you the most satisfaction?
Well, any of my bands have been great. I've enjoyed the band of Billy Cobham, David Sanchez, Clem Clemson. That was a good band. I do love playing with Gary Moore. Especially, I think we have a real rapport. Any time that I play with him, it's magic. I suppose musically the high spot was Tony Williams' band, the band with Tony Williams called Lifetime, with Larry Young, John McLaughlin.
Oh, sure.
That probably was musically the most exciting thing that I did after the Creams. But it's difficult to quantify things like that, because whatever you're doing at the time is very important, and you can't sort of say, well, I don't like this as much as that. You don't think people think that way, really.
Now, you mentioned earlier you've been touring with Ringo, and I believe you went through Russia.
We did, yeah.
How did that go?
Moscow and St. Petersburg.
How were the audiences there?
They were very good. They were kind of a bit restrained. I suppose they don't know yet how to behave at a rock concert. And although Ringo is fairly polite rock, I'm planning to go back there with Gary Moore and Gary Husband. If things kind of, or when things kind of stabilize a little bit there. I was supposed to be going in October, but that's been kind of put back to December. And I'd like to see how that works with a real hot band, because I think that might be slightly different. But having said that, they were very appreciative, and it was a very moving experience to actually play there. People coming up and saying, I've been waiting 20, 30 years for this, So it was a great experience to play there.
And as you mentioned before, I guess it was a good chance for you just to step back and be a bass player again.
Yeah, I did 3 or 4 of my own things in the set. In fact, I think I did 4 things of my own, but that's out of 22 songs or 23 songs. So yeah, for the rest of the time I was able to be a bass player, yeah, and that was fun.
Now let's talk about what you've got coming up. Any new recordings in the wind at all?
Yeah, I'm at the moment writing stuff for my first studio album for some time, and I'm hoping to get into the studio. Well, I want to start this year. You know, I want to start October, November in the studio. I'm very excited about what I've got. Really, it's my records tend to be kind of few and far between the studio ones for one reason and another. But it's time now that I did something, and I'm very excited about this project. Apart from that, I want to play live occasionally with Gary because that really stimulates me, and it's just a lot of fun.
How's the songwriting process changed for you over the years? Are you different now as a songwriter, do you think, maybe than in the past?
Well, I think when you're very young, it's all very new, and it's probably a bit easier then than it is now. It's probably a little harder now to actually. It's harder to get started. You know, once I get started, it's more or less the same process. Yeah. You know, but it's just more or less the same thing. You know, I'm still working with Pete. He's back working with me again, and I'm also working with Kip Hanrahan from time to time, who I like his lyrics very much. So, but it's not really very different. Obviously, the pressure, I don't have the same pressure that I did in the old days to come up with stuff in a very short period. So, in a way, that makes it harder. If you've got a real deadline to work to, it tends to make you do it more, you know. But I tend to make my own deadlines by being very lazy and not doing anything and then having to finish it yesterday. So, it amounts to the same thing, really.
Okay, Jack, look, I won't hold you up for any much longer. I want to thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
All right.
And thank you for all that wonderful music over the years. And we look forward to the new studio album. You've got your time frame in mind there?
Well, it'll be, if all going well, it'll be out next spring, hopefully.
Oh, terrific. We'll look forward to that. And we certainly hope maybe you can get a band together and treat us with some live work down here. We'd love to see you.
Yeah, there's a lot of people always contacting me, especially recently, asking me if I, and I almost made it over there some years ago with Billy Cobham, but it kind of fell through at the last minute, and definitely would like to get out there. I haven't been to Australia, and I'd like to see it, not just watch Neighbours, Get a real idea of what it's like.
Be the real thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Jack. Much appreciated your time.
Take
All the
care,
best. Bye-bye.